Live from your house, it's Sunday Morning Worship, Holy Humor Sunday Edition. Praising God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. Prayers and special readings by the congregation of UMC of Summit. Music by Joanne Tebner-Prusak and the Music Ministries of UMC Summit. Featuring the Parsonage Tech and Sound Effects team. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Pastor Christina.
This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us laugh and rejoice and be glad in it. Happy Sunday morning to you all. My name is Pastor Christina Lilash, and I'm delighted to be worshiping with you this morning and praising God this day as we gather together as the community and congregation of the United Methodist Church of Summit here in Summit, New Jersey. As you might have guessed by this point, we are celebrating Holy Humor Sunday today. This is an ancient Easter tradition that looks at celebrating God's gift of laughter and joy, and it comes from some early musings that God played a joke on the devil by raising Jesus from the dead. So it is in that spirit that we celebrate God's gift of laughter and goodness in our lives as a way of worshiping and praising this day. And I thought, just to dress up for the occasion, perhaps like many of you, I would wear my own robe today, especially since it's been a while since we've been together in the sanctuary and I've had the chance to robe on a Sunday morning.
So some of the best stories we get are from our kids when they're quite young out of church. There's a time when I asked her, Isabel, how was Sunday school today? Great. What did you learn? We learned that Winnie the Pooh and John the Baptist have something in common. What's that? Their middle name.
Why are bananas good at gymnastics?
Why?
Because they're great at doing the splits.
You might be a Methodist if any of this is true for you. You might be a Methodist if you forgive trespasses, not debts, during the Lord's Prayer. Or if you're watching Star Wars and someone says, "May the Force be with you," and you automatically respond, "and also with you."
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
It's Pasture.
Pastor who?
It's past your bedtime, missus.
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Rita.
Rita who?
Read a Bible if you want to hear some good news.
So we have one of those inclusionist church. We welcome all denominations, but we do prefer 20s and 50s.
Well, I want to thank everybody who has sent in jokes for us to share as part of worship this morning. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the service, Holy Humor Sunday comes out of the thinking of some of early theologians that God played a practical joke on death by raising Jesus from the dead. And so early churches would celebrate the Easter season by spending time in worship, laughing, and telling jokes together. And as you can imagine, people like to laugh. This tradition sort of got out of hand. People had big, grandiose celebrations, were telling all sorts of jokes, that finally the Pope issued an instruction that churches needed to tone the practice down significantly. And this, of course, led to the phrase, the party poper. In that spirit, we're going to share some of the jokes that you have sent in this morning, so I hope you are ready to laugh. Why can't you trust atoms? Because they make up everything. What do you call a pile of cats? A meowton. We have another cause to celebrate. Two antennae got married on a roof. The service wasn't all that great, but the reception was incredible. Shortly after getting married, a young couple started arguing over who was going to do what around the house. And one of the flashpoints in that argument was who was going to get up early in the morning to make the coffee. Being a faithful person, the wife decided to go to the Bible to see if it would offer any guidance for how they should sort out who should make the coffee. So she said to her husband that the Bible actually stated that it was his responsibility to get up and make the coffee. Puzzled, he looked at her and said, "Where in the Bible does it say that I should make the coffee?" Now, very confidently, she opened up the Bible, turned to the page of contents and said, "Look, it's right here, Hebrews." Another Bible question for you. We can go to the Bible to get a lot of information and guidance today, including the location of Solomon's temple. Do you know where Solomon's temple is located? It's on the side of his head. Well, after having children, Adam and Eve started getting a lot of questions from their kids about why they no longer lived in Eden. And Adam had a very simple answer to this question. Your mother ate us out of house and home. There was a young child who came to church for the first time, and she was watching all that went on in the service, trying to figure out what was going on. And when it came time to share the offering, she watched as the ushers began passing the offering plates around during the service. And when the ushers finally neared the pew where she was sitting with her family, she turned and said in a loud voice, as children like to do, "Oh, don't pay for me, Daddy. I'm under 5. St. Peter decided that after many, many weeks of watching the pearly gates and helping to orient those who were coming to heaven, he needed a day off to go fishing, and Jesus wanted to help him out. So he offered to keep an eye on the gates and to take over Peter's job while he went off fishing. So Peter gave Jesus some advice. When people arrive in heaven, just find out a little bit about them, engage them in some conversation so that way he could help them know where they should go. So time goes by as Jesus is standing at the gates, and he sees a little old man approaching in the distance who, as he draws closer to him, looks very, very familiar. And so when the man draws close, he asks him to tell him a little bit about himself. And the old man says, I've had a hard life. I was a carpenter, and you see, I had this son that I loved dearly. I lost him at a relatively young age, and he wasn't my natural child, but I loved him like he was my own. Well, as Jesus listens to this story, he begins to well up with emotion. And when he finishes, he throws his arms around the old man and says, "Dad!" And the old man goes, "Pinocchio?" Did you know that the first French fry wasn't cooked in France? It was cooked in Greece. Well, it was a rainy night a few nights ago, and there was a nun who was stumbling around and not sure where to go, and she needed to get out of the rain, and she came across a monastery and sought out some shelter there. Fortunately, she was just in time for dinner and was treated to some of the best fish and chips she's ever had in her life. So after dinner and after enjoying this amazing meal, she goes into the kitchen to thank the brothers who prepared it. And so she is introduced to 2 brothers, Brother John and Brother Charles. She says to them, "I'm so pleased to meet you. I just want to thank you for the most amazing dinner. Out of curiosity, who cooked what?" Brother Charles says, "Well, I'm the fish fryer." So she turns to the other brother and says, "Well, then you must be." And Brother John replies with a smile on his face, "Yes, I'm the chipmunk." There was a ship that went sailing past a remote island and spotted a man who had been stranded there for several years. So the captain goes ashore to rescue the man and notices 3 huts on the island. And curious, turns to the man and says, "What are these huts for? What's this first one over here?" And so the castaway says, "Oh, that's my house." "Well, what's the second hut for?" And the castaway says, "That's my church." And then he says, "Well, how about the last hut there?" And the castaway goes, "Oh, that? That's the church I used to go to." There were two little boys, ages 5 and 7, who were excessively mischievous. They were always getting into trouble, and their parents knew that if anything occurred in their town, that their kids were probably the ones who were involved. So the boy's mother heard that there was a pastor in town who was pretty successful in helping to discipline kids, and so she asked if he would speak to her children. The pastor agreed, but asked to see them individually. So the 5-year-old met with the pastor first, and this pastor, with a deep, booming voice, sat the younger child down and said to him sternly, "Do you know where God is?" The boy's mouth dropped open. He had no response, sitting there, just wide-eyed staring at the pastor. So the preacher repeated the question with an even sterner tone. "Do you know where God is?" Again, the boy made no attempt to answer. So finally, the priest raised his voice and said, "Where is God?" The boy bolted from the room, ran all the way home, and went into his bedroom shaking, trying to figure out what was going on. And when his older brother finally found him in the room and asked him what happened, the younger brother, gasping for breath, said to him, "We are in such big trouble. God is missing, and they think we did it." You're still here? The service is finished. Go. Be the church.